Hello everyone and welcome to today's Sutta class. We will start as usual with the Namo Tassa. Feel free to join if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, hello everyone and welcome to the Sutta class today. Today we are reading a sutta from the Majjhima Nikaya, the Cūḻadukkhakkhandha Sutta, or the shorter discourse on the mass of suffering. This is Majjhima Nikaya number 14. And this is a sutta where the Buddha is in conversation with Mahanama. Mahanama is the Buddha's cousin, brother of Anuruddha. And so Anuruddha obviously also was one of the foremost disciples of the Buddha, the one foremost in the divine eye, or the development of the divine eye. And so his brother Mahanama was a layperson and a cousin of the Buddha. And Mahanama also was a very accomplished practitioner. It is said that he was a stream enterer. And he talks to the Buddha here because he encounters some problems in his life. And he wonders why he has listened to so many Dhamma talks, but still he has trouble to get rid of the defilements in his mind, even though he clearly knows that they are defilements. And I feel that this is a very, very relatable question, because obviously we all have heard many, many Dhamma talks. We are clear that there is greed, hatred, and delusion in our mind. We're clear that these are defilements. We want to let them go. But somehow, for some reason, they keep on arising in our mind, even after many years of practice. So this is Mahanama's question, and we will see what the Buddha has to say. So let's get started. I have put a link in the live chat to Bhante Suchata's translation on Sutta Central, if you want to read along, and I will be reading from Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. So let's get started. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living in the Sakyan country at Kapilavatthu in Nigroda's park. So we see the Buddha has gone back to his home country, to Sakya, to the Sakyan country. And of course, all his relatives are still there. And for that reason, he meets his cousin, Mahanama. Then Mahanama the Sakyan went to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, he sat down at one side and said, "Venerable Sir, I have long understood the Dhamma taught by the Blessed One thus. Greed is an imperfection that defiles the mind. Hate is an imperfection that defiles the mind. Delusion is an imperfection that defiles the mind. Yet, while I understand the Dhamma taught by the Blessed One thus, at times, states of greed, hate, and delusion invade my mind and remain. I have wondered, Venerable Sir, what state is still unabandoned by me internally, owing to which at times these states of greed, hate, and delusion invade my mind and remain." So here is Mahanama, and he comes to the Buddha and he has a question. And he said, for a long time, I have already understood the Dhamma. Like I've heard many Dhamma talks. I understood clearly that greed, hatred, and delusions, those are defilements. They are in my mind. I should abandon them. But even though I clearly understand this, still from time to time, greed, hatred, and delusion arise in my mind. So clearly there's something that I haven't quite understood yet, or there's something that I haven't seen yet or haven't let go yet. So internally there must be a state that keeps me from going further, that keeps me from properly letting go of greed, hatred, and delusion. So what is that state that doesn't allow me to let go of these defilements? Even though I've heard many teachings and even though I clearly understand that I should let them go. So the Buddha answers him, Mahanama, there is still a state unabandoned by you internally, owing to which at times states of greed, hate, and delusion invade your mind and remain. For were that state already abandoned by you internally, you would not be living the home life, you would not be enjoying sensual pleasures. It is because that state is unabandoned by you internally that you are living the home life and enjoying sensual pleasures. So the Buddha confirms that indeed there is something that is blocking Mahanama and that is blocking us from going deeper, from really getting rid of greed, hatred, and delusion. And the Buddha says if that state is abandoned in a person, then they are not living the home life. That means they're not living as a lay person. That means that they have joined the Sangha and have gone forth from the home life into homelessness, so have become a monk or a nun. So if you have abandoned that state, then the Buddha says it's impossible for you to actually live the home life, and it's impossible for you to still enjoy sensual pleasures. So you wouldn't be attached to those sensual pleasures anymore. You wouldn't be attached to the pleasures of lay life. You would have no trouble letting all that go. And for that reason, definitely, you would be a member of the Sangha. So a fully ordained monk or a nun. And then the Buddha continues. Even though a noble disciple has seen clearly as it actually is with proper wisdom, that sensual pleasures provide little gratification, much suffering and despair, and that the danger in them is still more. As long as he still does not attain to the rapture and pleasure that are apart from sensual pleasures, apart from unwholesome states, or to something more peaceful than that, he may still be attracted to sensual pleasures. But when a noble disciple has seen clearly as it actually is with proper wisdom, that sensual pleasures provide little gratification, much suffering and despair, and that the danger in them is still more, and he attains to the rapture and pleasure that are apart from sensual pleasures, apart from unwholesome states, or to something more peaceful than that, then he is no longer attracted to sensual pleasures. So the Buddha says, well, many people are out there, they have listened to many teachings, probably like most of people who are listening to this teaching, they have heard many, many Dhamma talks, and they have clearly understood, they have developed wisdom, and they know that it's not worth running after sensual pleasures. It's just a very short dopamine hit. We feel good for a little while. But in the long run, they lead to a lot of suffering, they lead to a lot of despair. So it's really not worth running after them. And then there is the danger in them, which is even greater than just suffering and despair. We all know that, but if we don't attain to the rapture and pleasure that are apart from sensual pleasures and apart from unwholesome states or something more peaceful than that, then we still will fall back on sensual pleasures from time to time, even though we clearly know that. And the reason for that is, well, obviously we like happy feelings or pleasant feelings. We don't like unpleasant feelings. And if the only pleasant feelings that we have in our life is those small gratifications that we get from sensual pleasures, then we will still run after sensual pleasures. But if we can attain something that is better than that, obviously we will have no trouble letting go those inferior sensual pleasures for something that is higher than that. So if we are able to attain to those states that have rapture and pleasure apart from sensual pleasures, so obviously what the Buddha is talking about here is the jhanas. Jhana states are, of course, secluded from the sense realm and secluded or apart from the sense realm, apart from unwholesome states. So because the jhana states belong to the fine material realm, we're totally disconnected from the sensual pleasures if our mind is in jhana. And then we will feel that there is a happy state, a blissful state, a pleasant state that is much, much better than those states that we can get from sensual pleasures. And then, obviously, once we have access to that, we will have no trouble letting go of our attachment to sensual pleasures, since we have something better. So what the Buddha says here, either you attain to the rapture and pleasure that is apart from sensual pleasures, or you attain to something that is more peaceful than that. So what is the difference? So obviously rapture and pleasure are only, or in Pali called piti and sukha, these are only present in the first few jhanas. So rapture or piti is present in the first two jhanas, sukha or pleasure is present in the first three jhanas, but anything that is higher than that, so the fourth jhana and the immaterial attainments, those don't have rapture and pleasure, those have just equanimity. And obviously equanimity at that point is seen or experienced as even more pleasurable than actual pleasure, because it's so quiet, so peaceful, so calm. So that is felt as so relaxing and so joyful, even though there isn't really any joy there, that it is seen as higher and better than the piti and sukha that you have in the lower jhanas. So they are called states that are more peaceful than that. So obviously, if you attain to the fourth jhana or to an immaterial attainment, then obviously you also wouldn't have any problem letting go of the attachment to the sensual world. So it's not enough to just develop the wisdom to understand the Dhamma intellectually and to understand, well, there are all these defilements and I need to let them go. We're not actually able to let them go as long as we don't have access to a state that is more peaceful or more pleasant than the sensual pleasures. Because obviously we are attracted to, or we are attached, or we crave for pleasant feelings. So it's not the intellectual understanding, it's the actual feeling, which is the gut feeling, which is actually much more deeper buried in our mind than intellectual understanding. And that is very difficult to uproot unless we have access to other pleasant feelings, those higher pleasant feelings. And then the Buddha tells of his own path to enlightenment. And he says, before my enlightenment, while I was still only an unenlightened bodhisattva, I too clearly saw, as it actually is, with proper wisdom, how sensual pleasures provide little gratification, much suffering, and much despair, and how great is the danger in them. But as long as I still do not attain to the rapture and pleasure that are apart from sensual pleasures, apart from unwholesome states, or to something more peaceful than that, I recognized that I still could be attracted to sensual pleasures. But when I clearly saw, as it actually is, with proper wisdom, how sensual pleasures provide little gratification, much suffering, and much despair, and how great is the danger in them, and I attained to the rapture and pleasure that are apart from sensual pleasures, apart from unwholesome states, or to something more peaceful than that, I recognized that I was no longer attracted to sensual pleasures. So the Buddha went through exactly the same process as he has described it here. First, he had the intellectual understanding that he needs to abandon greed, hatred, and delusion, but he didn't attain jhana yet. So at that point, defilements were still in his mind and he was unable to abandon them. But after he attained to jhana, at that point, then he was able to let go of the attachment to sensual pleasures. And so we see that the intellectual understanding of the path is not enough. We have to actually practice. We have to actually develop jhana. And only if we actually do the work and if we actually develop our mind in that way, can we overcome the attachment to sensual pleasures. And obviously that is quite a high stage. So when we think about the 10 fetters that we have to abandon in order to attain arahantship, then even a stream enterer has not abandoned the fetter of sensuality and the fetter of ill will, so fetters that bind one to the sensual realm. And only a non-returner has abandoned all the ties, all the fetters that are attached to the sensual realm. So only a non-returner actually has fully overcome this, this possibility that greed and hatred that are bound up with the sensual realm or bound up with sensual pleasure can still invade the mind. So only at this stage will you actually be fully certain that they will never arise in your mind again? Even as a stream enterer, they can still arise in your mind. And as I mentioned, Mahanama also, he was a stream enterer, but he still experienced those states, as he says. And now the Buddha explains this in a little bit more detail. As he mentioned just now, he was talking about the gratification of sensual pleasures, and then the suffering and the despair that come from that, and also the danger that is in them. And of course, there is an escape. So now the Buddha explains about this gratification, the danger, and the escape. So, and the Buddha says, and what is the gratification in the case of sensual pleasures? So why are we attracted to sensual pleasures? And the Buddha says, Mahanama, there are these 5 courts of sensual pleasure. And if you're reading along in Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation, you now have to move on to another sutta because this is all elided. If you're reading along in Bhante Sujato's translation, then I think the text is fully there. So let's go back to Sutta 13 and read what is there. What is the gratification in the case of sensual pleasures? Here in this other sutta, the Buddha is talking to the bhikkhus, not to Mahanama. So he says bhikkhus, but it doesn't matter, bhikkhus or Mahanama. There are these 5 courts of sensual pleasure. What are the 5? Forms cognizable by the eye that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. Sounds cognizable by the ear, odors cognizable by the nose, flavors cognizable by the tongue, and tangibles cognizable by the body, that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. These are the 5 courts of sensual pleasure. Now the pleasure and joy that arise dependent on these 5 courts of sensual pleasure are the gratification in the case of sensual pleasures. So obviously sensual pleasures, as the name implies, are connected with the 5 senses, the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, and our body. So obviously we experience the world around us through our senses. We can't experience the world apart from the senses. So the only way for us to experience the world around us is through the senses. And whenever we have a pleasant contact with one of the senses and the outside world, then we feel a pleasant feeling. And so these are called the sense pleasures. So obviously for the eye, that would mean beautiful sights, seeing something beautiful, a beautiful person, or a nice scenery, or a beautiful sunset, or whatever. For the ear, that might mean music, or people saying nice words to us, or something some other thing that is a pleasant sound. Birds chirping, for example, or something like this. Then nose and tongue. This might be a rose that is smelling nicely, or another flower that might be smelling nicely, or food. Food obviously is one of the main things that creates sensual desire or creates sensual pleasures. Delicious smells of the food, and of course the taste of the food. So this is a very huge attachment for many people. And then of course the various feelings that we can feel through the touch of the body. That might be comfortable clothing, for example, or a nice smooth surface or something, and of course other bodily contacts such as sexual intercourse, for example. All of these kind of things all come under sensual pleasure, and of course sexual intercourse is one of the main things that binds us to samsara, and that is the cause for sensual desire or attachment to the sensual realm. So this is the gratification of sensual pleasures, so the thing that we like about sensual pleasures. Now the Buddha talks about all the drawbacks of sensual pleasures, so what he calls the danger in sensual pleasures. And so he continues and he says, and what, bhikkhus, or what, Mahanama, is the danger in the case of sensual pleasures? Here, on account of the craft by which a clansman makes a living, whether checking or accounting or calculating or farming or trading or husbandry or archery or the royal service, or whatever craft it may be. He has to face cold, he has to face heat, he is injured by contact with gadflies, mosquitoes, wind, sun, and creeping things. He risks death by hunger and thirst. Now, this is a danger in the case of sensual pleasures, a mass of suffering visible here and now, having sensual pleasures as its cause, sensual pleasures as its source, sensual pleasures as its basis, the cause being simply sensual pleasures. So now there is a whole list of dangers that all come from sensual pleasures. This is the first item on the list. So the Buddha says, because we want sensual pleasures, we have to go and work. So if we didn't work, we don't have money, so we can't buy sensual pleasures, we can't do nice things. Everybody needs to work and earn money. Otherwise, if we didn't need to work, probably would just lie in bed all day, or a nice cozy bed, and watch Netflix and get a lot of gratification out of the sensual pleasure of watching Netflix. But we have to work, we have to make money in order to get all those sensual pleasures, in order to get nice food, or any food at all, in order to have a comfortable place to live, in order to be able to raise a family, for example, because obviously other people around us, those are also sensual pleasures in that sense that we like being around those people. So doesn't matter, here's a whole list of various professions or various jobs that somebody might be doing. It doesn't matter which one. Any kind of job has some kind of drawback. Here's a list of things that you might have to face in a job. For example, of course, if you are a farmer, you have to go out, even though it rains, even though it's cold or hot or whatever, you need to go out. But even if you're not a farmer, as long as you don't work from home, you might need to go out. You have to drive around in your car. You might get hit by a truck. You might die. You might get injured. You might have an accident. It might be very cold because it's winter, it's snowing, there's ice on the road, or it might be really hot because it's summer and there's another heat wave, or there is a bushfire, so it's really dangerous. So because we have to go out and do stuff, we are in various dangers. Here in the list, there's also a list of various animals that might attack you. And of course, wind, sun, various things. We also risk contact with people we don't like. For example, we don't like our boss, we don't like our colleagues, or whatever, and we risk death by hunger and thirst. So obviously, many things can happen to us. Our body is quite fragile, our life is quite fragile. And because we have to go out and make a living, we are subjected to various kinds of dangers. So this is one danger in the case of sensual pleasures. Because of sensual pleasures, also we have a physical body, we are reborn in the human realm. Because obviously if we didn't have attachment to the sensual realm, we wouldn't be reborn in the sensual realm. So we wouldn't have a human body, for example, we would be reborn in a jhana realm or an immaterial realm. And of course, in a jhana realm or in an immaterial realm, you feed on rapture and pleasure, or you feed on light, or feed on mind states. And so you don't need to do that. You're just basically feeding yourself. So you don't have to go out, you don't have to go work, you don't have to do any of these unpleasant things. But because we are attached to sensual pleasures and are living in the sensual realm, we have to face all these unpleasant things. So this is one reflection how we can understand that sense pleasures come along with a lot of suffering and with a lot of despair. And then there is the next point about the danger of sensual pleasures, and the Buddha says, if no property comes to the clansman while he works and strives and makes an effort thus, he sorrows, grieves, and laments, he weeps, beating his breast, and becomes distraught, crying, my work is in vain, my effort is fruitless. Now this too is a danger in the case of sensual pleasures, a mass of suffering visible here and now, and so on, the cause being simply sensual pleasures. So we're going out, we're trying to work, we're trying to make a living. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes our efforts are in vain. And even though we work a lot, we strive and we endure a lot of hardships because of that, still we don't get any money. We can't make a living, and then people panic. They don't know how they can survive. And as the Buddha says here, they cry in their sorrow and grief. And so it's very, very stressful, obviously, for people if they can't make enough money and if they don't know how to survive. So this is another of the dangers of the attachment to sensual pleasures. Then the next point that the Buddha mentions, if property comes to the clansman while he works and strives and makes an effort thus, he experiences pain and grief in protecting it. How shall neither kings nor thieves make off with my property, nor fire burn it, nor water sweep it away, nor hateful heirs make off with it? And as he guards and protects his property, kings or thieves make off with it, or fire burns it, or water sweeps it away, or hateful heirs make off with it. And he sorrows, grieves, and laments. He weeps, beating his breast, and becomes distraught, crying, "What I had, I have no longer." Now this too is a danger in the case of sensual pleasures, a mass of suffering visible here and now, and so on, the cause being simply sensual pleasures. So first we had the case where people are working, but they can't make any money. Now people are working and they do make money, and still they have a lot of suffering because of that and a lot of stress, because now they have to protect their money because they want to keep it. They don't want to lose it again. It was so difficult to attain. And obviously they want to store it up for the future so that they can, again, enjoy sensual pleasures and have a feeling of safety and security for the future. So you have to protect your money, but even though you try your best to protect it, something happens to it. So maybe you put it in the bank and then there is a bank crash and the banks collapse, the banking system collapses and your money is gone. Or you bury it in your garden and then someone comes and digs it up and runs away with it. Or you put it under your pillow and then a robber comes or a burglar comes and takes it from your house. Or inflation comes and all your savings are eaten up by inflation. Or you put it into the stock market and the stock market crashes. So many different possibilities how this could disappear, or the government comes and increases taxes, or a fire burns down your house, or whatever. A flood comes and washes away your house, or a family member steals it. So many different possibilities, obviously. So even if you do make money, still it's very stressful, and still it can lead to a lot of suffering. And then the Buddha goes on again with sensual pleasures as the cause, sensual pleasures as the source, sensual pleasures as the basis, the cause being simply sensual pleasures. Kings quarrel with kings, nobles with nobles, Brahmins with Brahmins, householders with householders. Mother quarrels with son, son with mother, father with son, son with father, brother quarrels with brother, brother with sister, sister with brother, and friend with friend. And here, in their quarrels, brawls, and disputes, they attack each other with fists, clods, sticks, or knives, whereby they incur death or deadly suffering. Now this too is a danger in the case of sensual pleasures, a mass of suffering here and now, and so on, the cause being simply sensual pleasures. So, again, this is now a different case. This is when we are attached to the sensual realm, when we are attached to sensual pleasures, that means we have greed and hatred in our mind. We are not highly accomplished beings in a jhana realm, or we are not enlightened beings yet. That means we can start to quarrel with each other, because we all want the same sensual pleasures and we don't want to share. So everybody is fighting with each other to protect their pleasure, or to protect the things that they believe are theirs. Of course, when we have things, we think we have those things because we think that we get some kind of benefit from those things. So those are also considered sensual pleasures. And so kings quarrel with kings. Obviously, if you're a king, you have a certain country or a territory that you are responsible for, that you get your revenue from. And the bigger your territory and the richer your territory, the more money you have and the more pleasures you can enjoy. So obviously your territory is never big enough, and you try to enlarge it, and you go to war with another country, whether that's a king or whether that's some other kind of government. Wars can happen at any time. As we all know, in our world, even nowadays, there are not that many kings, but still we have quite a few wars. So kings quarrel with kings, and any other kind of person can quarrel with others, even within families, with people that we actually love and people we're actually close to. We can start to quarrel because of our attachment to sensual pleasures. So we love the people, we actually want to cherish them and protect them, but because we're overpowered by our defilements, we quarrel with each other, and it can get so out of hand that we actually hurt each other, and we get violent, and we take knives and stab each other, and we kill each other, or we injure each other. And so obviously this is a danger in the attachment to sensual pleasures. Because as long as we want to protect random stuff, and as long as we have hatred in our mind, this can very easily happen. And then the Buddha goes on, again, with sensual pleasures as the cause, and so on, men take swords and shields, and buckle on bows and quivers. And they charge into battle, massed in double array, with arrows and spears flying and swords flashing. And there they are wounded by arrows and spears, and their heads are cut off by swords, whereby they incur death or deadly suffering. Now this too is a danger in the case of sensual pleasures, a mass of suffering here and now, and the cause being simply sensual pleasures. So this fighting can happen on a small scale, as we have seen just now, between family members, and there can be like small-scale crimes where like a few people die or a few people are injured, and then of course there can be on a large scale massive wars, world wars, where like basically the whole world is one massive battlefield and everybody's just fighting each other. And again, the reason for that is our attachment, and the reason for that is our desire for sensual pleasures. And that causes obviously a lot of suffering to many people. Here in this list, it seems like it's only suffering for the soldiers that are actually fighting, but of course, when we think about war, it's a lot of suffering also for the civilians, for the population that lives there. They are wounded, they are killed, women are raped, children disappear. Just like war is really awful. The farmers can't produce any food, so there's not enough food in the country. The whole supply chain breaks down, so there are no goods available. Everybody really has to suffer, not just the soldiers. And then the Buddha goes on, again with sensual pleasures as the cause, and so on. Men take swords and shields and buckle on bows and quivers, and they charge slippery bastions with arrows and spears flying and swords flashing, and there they are wounded by arrows and spears and splashed with boiling liquids and crushed under heavy weights, and their heads are cut off by swords, whereby they incur death or deadly suffering. Now this too is a danger in the case of sensual pleasures, and so on. So again, this is just about the dangers of war, very similar to the point before. And then the Buddha continues, again with sensual pleasures as the cause, men break into houses, plunder wealth, commit burglary, ambush highways, seduce others' wives, and when they are caught, kings have many kinds of torture inflicted on them. The kings have them flogged with whips, beaten with canes, beaten with clubs, have their hands cut off, their feet cut off, their hands and feet cut off, their ears cut off, their noses cut off, their ears and noses cut off. They have them subjected to the porridge pot, to the polished shell shave, to the rahu's mouth, to the fiery wreath, to the flaming hand, to the blades of grass, to the bark dress, to the antelope, to the meat hooks, to the coins, to the live pickling, to the pivoting pin, and to the rolled up pallias. So these are all different kinds of torture. We don't really know what exactly some of them refer to. I think they all sound pretty grim and pretty gruesome. So obviously the commentary has some ideas about what they all mean. It doesn't really matter. It just means really, really cruel, like torture. And also the kings have them splashed with boiling oil, and they have them thrown to be devoured by dogs. They have them impaled alive on stakes, and they have their heads cut off with swords, whereby they incur death or deadly suffering. So obviously, because of our attachment to sensual pleasures, because we want to have stuff, and we might think, or some people might think, that committing crimes is an easy way to get to those sensual pleasures because it's an easy way to get money, or it's an easy way to get those things that you want. But of course, when you commit crimes, then you're caught, and then that will have very dire consequences. Obviously, nowadays we don't have, in most countries, we don't have these kind of tortures anymore, but still going to prison is still quite unpleasant, and some countries also still have the death penalty. So you could actually be killed for some certain kinds of crimes. And also we have to remember, now in the human realm, we're now living in the human realm. There are other realms that are much more terrible than this one. So even though in the human realm we don't have some of these tortures anymore, they still exist in other realms. And also situation in the human realm changes. Obviously in the Buddha's time there was this kind of torture, and there is no reason to believe that it won't reoccur again in the future. So since we are reborn in the future, even if we come back to the human realm, these kind of things might be around then. So there is no safety really in the human realm. Just because we've overcome them now doesn't mean that they will be gone for all times. So, and then the Buddha continues, and he says, again, with sensual pleasures as the cause, sensual pleasures as the source, sensual pleasures as the basis, the cause being simply sensual pleasures, people indulge in misconduct of body, speech, and mind. Having done so on the dissolution of the body after death, they reappear in states of deprivation, in an unhappy destination, in perdition, even in hell. Now, this is a danger in the case of sensual pleasures, a mass of suffering in the life to come. Having sensual pleasures as its cause, sensual pleasures as its source, sensual pleasures as its basis, the cause being simply sensual pleasures. So up until now, this entire list of various kinds of dangers was dangers that we can immediately see in this very life, because these are all things that we encounter right now. Like right now in this life, we can see how we have to work very hard. We can see how we might not make any money, or we might lose the money again that we have made. We can see how it leads to all these quarrels, and how it can lead to large-scale warfare, and how it can lead to all kinds of punishment if we commit crimes, because you want to attain those sensual pleasures in an illegal way. And now the Buddha has one last argument here, which is not about this life, this human life where we can immediately see the consequences, but about the life to come. Obviously, there is rebirth. And if, because of sensual pleasures, we do something unwholesome by body, speech, and mind, for example, we might steal, we might trick somebody in order to get something we want, or we might lie to somebody in order to get something we want, or to avoid something we don't want, or we might engage in sexual misconduct, for example, rape somebody because we're just so overpowered by lust. Then, of course, this is all unwholesome and like unwholesome karma, and that will lead to a bad rebirth. And as I mentioned before, if you get reborn in a lower realm, then consequences can be a lot more unpleasant than even all the things that were here listed for the human realm. So all these are dangers in sensual pleasures. And again, this is another Dhamma talk. So again, we hear that greed, hatred, and delusion, that attachment to sensual pleasures is dangerous, that we should let this go, as we have heard many times before. So basically, we're coming back to the beginning of this Dhamma talk, where Mahanama said, I've heard this so many times, but I still can't let it go. And where the Buddha said, you have to develop jhana in order to be able to fully let this go. But of course, wise reflection, developing wisdom also helps us to slowly wear down our defilements. So for that reason, the Buddha gives this whole explanation again, so that we have a bit more motivation to actually sit down and do our practice and develop those jhanas. And then we have now talked about the gratification, we've talked about the danger, of course there's also the escape. And the Buddha says, what, bhikkhus, is the escape in the case of sensual pleasures? It is the removal of desire and lust, the abandonment of desire and lust for sensual pleasures. This is the escape in the case of sensual pleasures. So obviously, if you have no more desire for sensual pleasures, if you have no more craving, if you're not attached to the sensual realm anymore, then you have escaped all this suffering. And how do we do this? Well, the Buddha just said it. We have to develop jhana and develop a pleasure that is higher than sensual pleasures. And through that, then we can completely let go of our attachment to those sensual pleasures. So, I saw that some people have posted questions or comments in the live chat. So I think for today, we will just leave it here. And if you have any questions or comments, please post them in the chat and I will see if I can answer them. So let's see. Welcome everyone. Nice to see so many people checking in. Good to see you all. And Sud has left a question here and they say, I thought the stream enterer can clearly see Nibbana. Why would then the stream enterer still be attached to sensual pleasures, which are described as inferior? Well, just as we all can clearly see that greed, hatred, and delusion cause a lot of suffering in our mind, but still we're not able to fully let them go. In the same way, we can also clearly understand that, like as a stream enterer has seen non-self, they understand about Nibbana, but so intellectually, they're fully clear about the path, they're fully clear how to practice, but still like emotionally, that like subconsciously deep down in the mind, those underlying defilements are still there, and it takes a long process to let them go step by step. And so the stream enterer only has let go of 3 fetters, the first 3 fetters, which is attachment to rites and rituals, identity, view, and doubt. And then as they keep on practicing, they progress to once returning, which means that they have weakened the fetter of sensuality and the fetter of ill will. But still, even once returners still have that fetter of sensuality and the fetter of ill will. It's just that it's weakened. And only the non-returner has fully abandoned those 2 fetters. So only at the non-returner stage can you fully overcome the sensual realm. And well, the reason is that intellectual understanding and actually putting this into practice and actually fully abandoning this are 2 things. And this is it might be a longer path. In the same way that a stream enterer has already abandoned identity view, so they fully understand about non-self. But the conceit I am is only abandoned at arahantship, because intellectually they have understood, but that feeling is still there, and it takes a while to abandon that. So the next question is from Deborah, and she says, I'm having trouble connecting attachment to sensual pleasures and greed, hatred, and delusion. Is it that sensual pleasures are delusional? So sensual pleasures are, of course, delusional because we only have greed in our mind because we have delusion. If we only had wisdom in our mind, we wouldn't be greedy for sensual pleasures, or we wouldn't be greedy for anything because we see that it leads to suffering. But because we have delusion in our mind, we can't properly see that all the time. So we still run after sense pleasures even though they lead to suffering, because we believe that they lead to pleasure. So it seems that you don't understand, you have trouble connecting attachment to sensual pleasures. So sensual pleasures, as the name says, are things that are pleasurable. So that means that there are nice feelings. We feel very happy, we feel comfortable, we feel pleasant. And because it's a nice feeling, we want to have more of it. And this wanting to have more of it means that we have attachment. means that we cling to this, we want to have it again, we want to prolong the feeling, or if it has already gone, we want to get it back again. So that means that is attachment, or that means that is greed, trying to get those sensual pleasures back. Hatred, of course, is the opposite of that, means that either someone else has the pleasure and we want to have it, so we hate that person who has it, we are basically jealous or we are angry or something. Or it means that there's something that is unpleasant, we have an unpleasant feeling and we want to get rid of that feeling. And of course, it's kind of a negative attachment. Basically, hatred is the exact opposite to greed. And so we are attached to sensual pleasures, but in some way we are also attached to things that we hate, because we can't just simply let them be, and we can't just simply be neutral and equanimous with them. So, and Deborah says the sensual pleasures cause all these actions of greed, hatred, and delusion, right? Well, it's our attachment to these sense pleasures that cause all these actions. Obviously, for example, an arahant can live in this human world. An arahant still has this human body, but they don't have greed, hatred, and delusion in the mind. So they're still surrounded by all these sense pleasures. For example, they can eat the same food as any other person. So it's not the thing itself, it's the attachment in the mind that causes all these actions. So it's not the food itself, or it's not the beautiful flower or the beautiful sunset or the nice car or the nice house or attraction to another person. So it's not the other person, it's our own mind that causes all these actions. So Nirajan has a question for me to explain what I think is Panya Vimutti and Chitta Vimutti. So liberation by wisdom and liberation by mind. So the path to liberation can be slightly different for different people. Some people, because people have different mental setup, different qualities. Some people, for example, have a very easy time developing samadhi, but their wisdom faculty isn't very strong. And some people have a very strong wisdom faculty, but, for example, have trouble developing deep states of peace and calm within themselves. So because people have different faculties, so the path to liberation can be somewhat different for different people. Some people more rely on developing wisdom, doing contemplation practices, and so on. Some people rely more on developing deep states of calm. But eventually, in the end, everybody needs to have a certain amount of wisdom, and everybody needs to have a certain amount of calm and peace in the mind. So it's just that sort of the weight of those two qualities is somewhat different for different people. And people who have a dominant wisdom faculty realize what is called liberation by wisdom. People who have a dominant samadhi faculty realize what is called liberation by mind. And such people with a dominant samadhi faculty usually have an easy time developing all the four jhanas and developing the immaterial attainments. And such people can also have an easier time developing, for example, psychic powers and these kind of things, because psychic powers are based on the fourth jhana. And so there can be a somewhat different, like in terms of the liberation itself, they're all fully liberated. They've all fully abandoned greed, hatred, and delusion in the mind. They're all arahants, but some arahants have some special abilities and others don't, which depends on which faculty is dominant for them. So that is the difference here. Somebody asks, can an arahant still enjoy beautiful worldly sights? So an arahant obviously can still see all these beautiful worldly sights. So an arahant can still see a sunset, for example, and they might still, obviously, since they still have a body, they can still feel that pleasant feeling, but they don't have any attachment for that pleasant feeling. In the same way that they can still feel painful feelings, so their body can still hurt, but they wouldn't be mentally troubled by this. In the same way, when they see a beautiful sight, they wouldn't be mentally agitated by this. They wouldn't have any kind of clinging towards that sight. But of course, they can still see that sight. Richard says, thanks for the Sutta study, Ayya. I read MN14 13 and 14 yesterday for the first time. Oh, what a coincidence. And I was going to send an email request to cover it, but you've already done a great job today. Oh, well, I'm glad that this worked out for you. Sometimes this is just happens like this. Universe or karma or whatever provides just what we need to hear the most. So I'm glad that this worked out for you. Seems like you made good karma. You didn't even have to ask. It just came to you all by itself. And then Pial and Indira have another question, and they say, it's not the sensual objects out there that is the problem, but the desire towards them. So we can still enjoy them if we can cut off the desire. Well, sort of, but if you think I still want to enjoy this, then obviously your desire is still there. So it doesn't really work that way. It works the other way around. So you have to let go of the desire through practice. And then later, when you're an arahant and you still encounter the object, then you will just notice, I'm free of this desire. So as long as you still want to enjoy the object, it seems to say that you still have desire in the mind. So I wouldn't rely too much on this kind of argumentation. I would rather try to just abandon the connection with the sensual world, try to develop jhana, as the Buddha suggests here. And once you have actually developed jhana and you see how much better it is, how much more pleasurable it is, how much nicer it is there, and how inferior the sensual world is compared to that, then it's quite easy to let it go. And then you don't need to think about, maybe later I can still enjoy this sensual object if I don't cling to it and so on. You just don't have any desire to enjoy it at all. If it happens to cross your life path, then and it's still there, well, then that's okay and that's nice. But you wouldn't think in this way anymore as an arahant. So it seems like that was the last question for today. And in that case, we can finish now with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So next week, there will not be a sutta class because we are having a 5-day retreat in our monastery here. And so we will all be in silence. And so the next sutta class will be in 2 weeks. And I hope you all have a great rest of the day and a good week. And I will see you all in 2 weeks then. Bye-bye.